Good afternoon and welcome to this Live Free or Die Alliance webcast. And joining me is a very special guest here in New Hampshire. I'm Jack Heath, host of this webcast for the Live Free or Die Alliance, also host of New Hampshire Today on radio. Our guest this afternoon is the first woman in United States history to be elected both governor and United States Senator. That's quite a distinction, and she is Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Jack. And nice to be on the Live Free or Die Alliance webcast. You know, this is a really exciting new venture for New Hampshire, and I think very important given what's happening with media in New Hampshire and across the country. People have fewer and fewer sources of objective information to let them know about issues that are facing the state and facing them in their own lives. And so I think this is a wonderful venture, and I applaud. It's got a bipartisan group of people who have started it. You know, I applaud Paul Montrone, who's here with us this afternoon, and Anna Grace Holloway, who's also here, some of the original founders, and I think it's going to be good for New Hampshire.
And the webcasts have been done at great locations. We're here at the University of New Hampshire, which is such an important part for the state, right. St. Anselm College, Institute of Politics. Senator Shaheen was also a state senator and very illustrious political career. Thank you for being with us. And as the senator said, those unfamiliar with the Live Free or Die Alliance, it is a nonpartisan organization created to serve New Hampshire citizens. It provides objective information on issues and candidates, makes it easy to exchange opinions with others and channel members, questions and needs to elected officials such as Senator Shaheen. It's truly citizenship for the 21st century. Over the next 30 minutes, we will take a number of submitted questions and those live online and pose them directly to Senator Shaheen. So thank you, Senator, and let's start with probably one of the most talked about issues here in New Hampshire nationally. That's health care reform. You voted in favor of health care reform, the new law. Why?
You know, health care is something that I've been working on for a very long time. When I was governor, I was really proud to be able to bring children's health insurance to New Hampshire. I understand and have talked to so many people who say, you know, I can't be secure about my future if I'm worried that I can't see a doctor when I need to see one, or families who say, you know, I'm worried that I can't afford to take my kids to the doctor. So I think it's very important for us to address making sure that people can see a doctor when they need to. But health care is not just about access. It's also about quality and it's about cost. We need to begin to stabilize health care costs. Health care has become unaffordable for too many families and businesses who can't afford to continue to pay their health insurance premiums as they go up, in many cases, by double digits. So this is an issue that I have thought for a very long time we needed to address. And there's been a lot of misinformation, and we had, when we're talking about 1/6 of our economy, which is what health care is, it's easy to see why people are confused about what's in the bill. But there are some very good things that I think people will find are going to be very helpful to them. First of all, are health insurance reforms. You know, right now people are concerned if they've got a pre-existing condition. Well, they won't need to be anymore under this legislation. If you have a pre-existing condition, you can no longer be denied health insurance coverage. And for children, that begins this year with the passage of the bill. For people who are on Medicare, who have been concerned about the high cost of prescription drugs, especially those who fall into what's called the donut hole, where Medicare doesn't cover their cost of prescription drugs, they're going to get some additional help. Some of that will, again, begin this year, and eventually it will cover all of the cost of prescription drugs for people on Medicare. For small businesses who have had trouble covering their employees but would like to, but because of the high cost of health insurance, they haven't been able to do that. They'll get help with tax credits. So there are a lot of things in this legislation that are going to make a difference for people.
There are a lot of perceptions out there about this bill that is now law, and one of them is that it may burden cash-strapped states by bringing in a slew of additional health care costs. True or not?
Well, in fact, the analysis that the administration has done, Governor Lynch and his administration, shows that it will be cost neutral. And in fact, in the short term, they think it will provide some additional help to New Hampshire.
Just a quick follow-up before we go to a question on insurance. If it's such a good bill and law, what's fueling some of the groups that are protesting not just this, but why is this added to either a suspicion or a disdain towards Congress and the federal government? This law seems to have added people rallying and protesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. Sadly, I think the legislation became very partisan, even though as it was going through the committee, there were a lot of Republican amendments that were adopted in the legislation. In the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee alone, they adopted over 160 Republican amendments. So I think when a bill is this big, when it deals with an issue this personal, there's confusion, there was a lot of misinformation about it, and that made it hard for people to understand what was in it. But I think as people learn more about what's in the bill, as they begin to see it make a difference in their own lives, that they're going to change their view of it. You know, the other thing, Jack, is that there was a lot of concern about the cost of this legislation, but in fact it's fully paid for, and the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan agency of the government that talks about how much things cost, they have said that in the first 10 years it will actually reduce the deficit by over $130 billion.
So you think over time those who are upset will simmer down?
Well, you know, some people are always going to be concerned, but I think for many people who have been concerned about the impact, they're going to see that it actually is going to make a positive difference in their lives.
Senator, you recently criticized WellPoint, which owns Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for raising health insurance premiums 12 to 13% in New Hampshire, while posting a reported 700% increase in profits for the fourth quarter of 2009. The Live Free or Die Alliance spoke with Douglas Wenners, president and GM of Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Hampshire, and he gave three reasons for the increase in premiums. One, basically the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements have hospitals increasing the negotiated cost. In other words, they're getting less, so the insurance company's getting less. 25% increase in elective surgery, according to them, in New Hampshire. And finally, with the bad economy and the recession, a lot of younger people, to save costs, were giving up health care insurance. So they say that taxed the system for people with more expensive health issues. What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, I had a chance to talk to Doug, and we have a very good relationship, and so I let him know that I was concerned about the increase in prices. And I think what's interesting is that all three of those concerns that he cited will all be addressed when the health care legislation goes into effect. The elective surgery is something that people were doing because of their concern about the rising cost of health insurance, the change in the reimbursement rates for Medicare and Medicaid. That will all be taken care of when we get health insurance legislation into effect. So I appreciate their reasons for raising the prices, but I think when you've got consumers out there who are facing double-digit increases in their health insurance costs, especially at a time when the insurance company is posting that kind of an increase to their bottom line, then it's important to ask questions. You know, one of the good things about the legislation is that it will require insurance companies to spend 80%, at least 80% of the dollars that they're spending on health care, as opposed to having it go into CEO compensation or into other investments. I think that's very important. People want to feel like their health insurance dollar is going for health care.
The president, even in New Hampshire and Portsmouth, seemed to take on the big bad insurance companies, if you will, and you've been critical. Do you think the insurance companies took a little bit of too much of a bad rap, or are they a partner in this process regardless?
Well, certainly I believe they're going to be a partner as we figure out how we do a better job of providing health care for people. And I'm hopeful that as the legislation gets implemented, that we're not going to see these kinds of double-digit increases for premiums for people.
Former President Bill Clinton had a line that he used in New Hampshire. It's the economy, and he said, a line after that I won't say, but let's talk about the economy. Last week, the National Bureau of Economic Research said that even though most economic indicators are trending up, it's premature to say this recession is really behind us. Do you agree?
Well, I think as long as we have here in New Hampshire 7% of people who are unemployed, that's way too high. As long as we have at a national level almost 10% unemployed, that's too high, and we've got to do more to help them. That's one reason I've been out there saying we need to extend unemployment benefits for people, because we need to help people as they go through these difficult times. And that's one of the best ways we can stimulate the economy, because we know when somebody's got that unemployment check, they're going to spend it for their rent, for their groceries, to put gas in their car, and it's going to go right back into the economy. I also think we've got to look at where we can invest long-term to get this economy going again and to create jobs. And one of the areas that I've really focused on is the area of new energy technologies, because that's a place where we know there are going to be millions of jobs created in the future. And I think here in New Hampshire, we want to be a leader in helping to create those jobs. I was up at a company named Warner Power on Friday with one of the assistant energy secretaries who was here. I think it's important for us to bring people from Washington to New Hampshire to let them know what we're doing here. And they're making energy efficient transformers, something that most of us don't think about as we're thinking about how do we save energy. But they could save, they estimate, 5% of the energy, and the cheapest, fastest way to address our energy needs is through energy efficiency. And they were estimating that if they can continue with the production of this transformer, that they're going to create anywhere from 100 to several hundred jobs in the next year or two.
I imagine some of these officials from Washington, when you bring them here, probably want to stay here for a little longer and not go back to Washington.
Well, she had actually graduated from Dartmouth, so she knew the benefits of New Hampshire.
She probably want to spend an extra day. Education, if my memory is correct, you have a background in education.
I have been a teacher and also worked here at UNH. In fact, my office was just in the next building over in the MUB. I was the director of the Parents Association here.
On education, this is startling. According to the Department of Education's most recent assessment of schools, 72% of New Hampshire schools fail to make what they call adequate yearly progress in one or more areas as defined by the No Child Left Behind Act. Do you think schools need first of all, is this accurate? Second of all, do you think schools need a new measuring stick?
I do think schools need a new measuring stick, and I think it really is misleading to say that 72% of New Hampshire schools have not made progress. One of the things that has been proposed as we look at how do we change the No Child Left Behind law is to look at progress over past performance. So instead of saying, this is the bar and we need to see if everybody's going to get over that bar next year, to say this is how people were doing last year, this is how they're doing this year, this is how they're going to do next year, so that we're gauging performance based on not some arbitrary line, but based on how kids are actually doing in school. And I think that makes a lot more sense, and that we then reward those schools for how they're doing.
Switching gears, maybe one of the most contentious topics right now coming up this week and in this period in New Hampshire is expanded gambling and the debate around it. Casinos and slot machines are going to be taken up by the full House this week, as expected in Concord. As former governor, would you support expanded gambling as a way to increase state revenues? Yes or no?
Well, ultimately the governor and the legislature are going to make this determination. But as most people who remember when I was governor know, I supported video lottery at the racetracks. We're already gambling there. I thought that was a reasonable way to increase revenue without raising taxes. And so I continue to think that made sense.
Something that you and I spoke about recently on the radio, Airlines. There's an article today in some of the New Hampshire papers. How do you feel about the announcement that 5 of the bigger airlines have agreed not to charge extra for that carry-on baggage? Now, you know I like Southwest Airlines and bags are free, but that's not been the same case with other airlines. So you took that on, and it seems like you might have won that one.
Well, certainly that was great news to hear that 5 of the 6 biggest carriers had said they're not thinking about moving in the direction of charging for carry-on bags. You know, I think the issue here is making sure that consumers know what they have to pay, so that when you book a ticket, and I'll give you an example, a constituent last week told me that she had booked a round-trip ticket from between Manchester and Washington, D.C., and she said, you know, I went online, I booked what I thought was the cheapest ticket. I got to the airport and I realized I had to pay to check my bag and pay both ways. And so I wound up paying more than I would have had I booked the other ticket. And I think part of this is making sure that the traveling public understands what they're paying for when they pay these charges. I think people feel like they're being nickel and dimed to death. And we need to level the playing field. We need to make sure that people know what they're paying for and that airlines are being treated equally.
Again, if you're just joining us, this is the live webcast of the Live Free or Die Alliance in the University of New Hampshire. That last question on the airlines and the bags came from Karen online. Switching to foreign policy, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, our guest. As a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, do you support the troop increase in Afghanistan? Have we seen the measurable success that we want to see since the surge? And are our forces, the U.S. forces, still actively pursuing or hunting Osama bin Laden?
Well, the stakes in Afghanistan are very high, regardless of what we do there. And right now we only have about half of those 30,000 committed troops on the ground in Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to visit there, both there and Pakistan, last year about this time, and it was a time right after Ambassador Eikenberry had arrived in Pakistan or in Afghanistan, and the first increase in troops to do training had arrived. And I think we've got to watch very carefully what goes on there. But we're there because that's the nexus of militant extremism, of nuclear weapons in Pakistan, and of terrorism. And as we all remember, that's where the September 11th attacks were planned, and Al-Qaeda had been able, and the Taliban had been able to operate with impunity in Afghanistan. And I don't think we can allow that again. So I think we are seeing some progress. We have to monitor it very closely, and I'm pleased that we have not just the troops on the ground, but we have an increased support for the civilian efforts there as well.
Question about the current political environment. Former President Bill Clinton recently came out and talked about the divisiveness and the rhetoric going on. We remember at the
With
end
respect to Afghanistan?
No, we're moving on to just the environment right now. New topic online.
Okay.
It's a webcast. It's just live media all the time, 24/7.
You got to explain this to me.
Yeah, you're a pro. I'll go back to days at MUR. I said before the show to Paul Montrone, you were one of the most natural, so you don't need any training. But switching gears to the current political environment, former President Bill Clinton was talking about the divisiveness out there. We remember at the end of the Bush administration, there was a lot of fatigue, independent, even in the Republican ranks. President Obama talked about hope in a new bipartisan era, but yet we see that the Tea Party rallies happening across the country. What is your reaction to the current contentious or divisive mood out there, at least with a good number of people who are taking the time out of their days to go to these rallies?
You know, it's a great thing about America, freedom of speech. People have the opportunity to let government know when they disagree with what's going on. We have the right to assembly, so I think it's one of the great things about this country. But I think what's important is to say whether, regardless of where you are on that ideological spectrum, that it's important to be civil and be respectful of people who may have a different point of view. Actually, that's one of the things I like about this Live Free or Die Alliance, because I think it is an effort to promote civil discourse. In fact, you may be announcing this later, but Senator Gregg and I are going to be working with the Live Free or Die Alliance and New Hampshire Public Radio in a couple of weeks. I think we're going to be at St. Anselm's College to talk about the importance of civil discourse. And, you know, America is a great democracy, and one of the things that makes it work is that people can get involved. But it's important when we get involved to recognize that everybody may not share our opinion. You know, I used to say to my students when I was teaching, democracy works, but often you think it doesn't work because the outcome isn't what you wanted. Well, democracy does work. It just may not always work the way I want it to.
Let's talk about New Hampshire's age. New Hampshire, according to some people who study demographics, is getting older. In fact, there's been a 20% decline of younger people, and we define that, according to some experts, as 25 to 34 years old. 15% among 35 and 44-year-olds not staying in New Hampshire. How can we make New Hampshire more vibrant and keep younger, whether they're college graduates from the University of New Hampshire where we sit, or people just getting into the workforce? How can we keep younger people here?
Well, it's a huge challenge, not just for us, but for lots of other states in this country. And I think it starts with a good education, making sure that we really focus on not just K through 12 education, but higher education, and then making sure that there are jobs when people graduate. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the new fields in energy, because I think they offer one of the best opportunities, just like technology did throughout the 90s. New Hampshire's, since that time, had one of the highest tech workforces in the country. We've consistently been in the top in the country. And we need to look at where there are emerging industries and invest in those industries and make sure that our young people know what's available to them and that there are good jobs here. Because there's no better quality of life anywhere in the country than we have in New Hampshire. I feel blessed that 2 of my daughters have decided to stay here and raise their families here, which I'm very appreciative of. I'm sure I'm going to get that 3rd one back eventually. But, you know, people will stay if they know there are good jobs and opportunities for them.
Back to New Hampshire State House. Recently, the House of Representatives voted to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. As former governor, what's your position on that? Would you have supported this or not?
Well, I think we've got to address drug abuse in this country. It's a huge issue, whether it's alcohol or cigarettes even, or you know, marijuana or heroin, other drugs. So I don't think making drugs more available is a good way to go.
Immigration reform. This subject always amazes me because before the economy went south, if you will, almost every presidential candidate had a plan on immigration reform. Then we didn't hear about it for a while. Now we're hearing about it again. Maybe that's a sign the economy's getting a little better. But do you support immigration reform? Would you join Senator Judd Gregg by expressing your support for a bill this year? And that's from Chris online. Thank you, Chris.
I do think we need immigration reform. And I think, first of all, there are a lot of companies in New Hampshire who are dependent on people who come in who need H-1B visas to do some jobs. I think we need to take a look at that. But fundamentally, I think we've got to make sure our borders are secure. We need to crack down on people who are hiring illegal immigrants, and we need to set up a path to legalization for those people who are here so that they can ultimately pay their taxes, so that they learn English, so they can become contributing members of our society. Because when we've got this underground economy that we have with illegal immigrants, it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the people who they're taking jobs away from.
In our final few moments here, environment and energy, something we talked about earlier. The New Hampshire is part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We're hearing now from the President that one of the big new topics in the Senate or Congress may be the so-called cap and trade type of legislation. Do you support programs like the cap and trade, and if so, why?
Well, I certainly support the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and I think the cap and trade system that's been put in place here works very well. We've got over $500 million going out this year across that the states that are participating for energy efficient projects. Now, I think the issue is how do we move to a new energy economy, and how does the United States become a leader in doing that? Because right now we have the prospects of falling behind China and Germany and even Brazil. So what we've got to do is to look at where we can make investments and move towards this new energy economy. And we need to do that for national security reasons, so that we're no longer sending billions of dollars overseas to many countries that would like to undermine the United States. We've got to do it for environmental reasons, because as we've already seen in New Hampshire, climate change is beginning to affect us right here in New Hampshire. But I think most important, perhaps, we need to do it for economic reasons, because as I said, there are millions of new jobs that are going to be created in those new energy technologies, and we should be a leader in America in those jobs. We need to take control of our energy future.
A popular issue with the Live Free or Die Alliance is the what is referred to as the top two primary system. With this format, the top two vote getters, regardless of party affiliation, would go on to the general election. Some supporters say this would reduce the partisan bickering, the name-calling, and maybe even other issues that voters get frustrated by. What's your opinion on the top two primary system?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about what's being proposed, but I think our two-party system has worked very well throughout most of our history. And, in some cases there have been third parties, and that's good, but a system that's based on political parties, I think has worked well, and we should continue that. I would have reservations about changing that in any major way.
Some of your colleagues with this 2010 election cycle, which you're not a part of, your election's a couple years away from that, but people like Senator Bayh, so well thought of from both sides of the aisle, just up and saying, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm paraphrasing, but his press conference, not having fun, criticizing the discourse in Congress, just kind of burnt out for whatever reason, leaving public office. What are your thoughts? And then a second follow-up on that, do you think people are getting close to the point where term limits could be discussed again in Washington for federal Congress or Senate?
Well, I think we have term limits. I think they're called elections. But I do think there is frustration that I share often with the obstructionism that goes on in Washington, and I think the Senate rules contribute to that. I think we need to change the filibuster system. I don't think one person should be able to hold things up indefinitely. Right now we've got, I think, something like over 90 nominees who are being held up because somebody's objecting to something about them. And they don't have to say what their objections are. They don't have to identify themselves. I don't think that makes sense. And I'll give you a good example. Excuse me, Susan Carbon, who many of us in New Hampshire know. She was a judge originally appointed by Judd Gregg. I appointed her to be a full-time judge when I was governor. So she had bipartisan support. She was nominated to head the Office of Violence Against Women, a pretty nonpartisan office. She had support, unanimous support coming out of the committee, and yet she was held up on the floor for 2 months I'm still not sure what the reason was, because nobody had to identify why they were holding her up or who they were. Well, that needs to change. You shouldn't be able to hold up a nominee who has unanimous support out of committee, and you shouldn't be able to hold up something like an extension of unemployment benefits. Last fall, when we were trying to extend unemployment benefits, I was working on that. That was held up for a month before we finally got a vote on the floor, and then it passed 97-0. Well, we need to change the rules, because that doesn't make sense.
We'll call this our lightning round. Last question from our online viewers and audience, and thank you very much for joining us, from Anthony. It has been said that health care will cost $3 billion. Where will this money come from?
Well, it's going to cost more than that, and the money comes from a combination of...
He might have meant trillion, I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Well, he may. I don't think it's going to cost a trillion. it's going to cost 900 and some billion. But it's, as I said, fully paid for, and it comes from a variety of charges. Some of them are additional charges on the wealthiest people in the country, on their Medicare hospital tax. There are some other charges, but as I said, it's fully paid for, and it goes to, over time, reduce the deficit.
Final, New Hampshire presidential primary, safe and secure by both parties?
Boy, it better be. I think what we saw again in 2008 was the contribution that the New Hampshire primary made to the whole process of electing a president.
I want to thank Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Some trivia on the senator you may not be aware of, but many of the members are really interested in political history. She and Sue Casey, a good friend of hers, actually engineered Gary Hart's successful presidential primary upset win.
In 1984, the good primary.
There you go. Senator Shaheen, thank you so much for being with us on behalf of the Live Free or Die Alliance and for addressing all these questions and concerns for our New Hampshire citizens. For those members who did not have their questions asked or selected today, feel free to post the question on our Live Free or Die Alliance virtual town hall, Live Free or Die Alliance virtual town hall, or any of our social media platforms for further discussion. An archive of this web event will be posted on the website as well, so we urge you to go to the website. It's very interactive and informative, and we rely on you to make it that way. Finally, we urge you to join the Live Free or Die Alliance, where you can get the facts, share your opinion, and let your voice be heard. Thanks to the University of New Hampshire, and thanks to Senator Jeanne Shaheen, and thanks to you. Have a good afternoon. I'm Jack Heath.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack.